Hey everyone, welcome back for mini lecture 3, what I like to call battling biology. Now, many of you may be having a hard time with chapter 2 and with chapter 5. After all, you didn't realize that when you were signing up for a psychology class, you'd also be getting a biology class. What I'd like to do is share with you a trick that helped me a lot when I was learning biological psychology and neuroscience, both in undergrad and in grad school. You see, when you try to approach chapters 2 and 5 like they're lists of vocabulary words that have to be memorized, this makes this really, really hard. What helps is to instead look at it as if it's a piece of equipment that you're trying to figure out how it works. This way, if you forget the name of one little part, it's easy to remember how everything else works, and sometimes you can figure it out based on what it's connected to and what it does. In fact, the names of a lot of the things that you have to know, the parts of neurons, the parts of the brain, the parts of the rest of the nervous system, are based either on where they are or what they do. For this mini lecture, I am going to show you a trick that you can use connected to this to remember the parts of a neuron. Now, whether we're talking about parts of a neuron or parts of the brain, there's this trick that I learned that's really, really helpful. And that trick is to draw pictures. Now, your pictures don't have to be very good. Frankly, they're probably going to be terrible, but so are mine. And really, the quality of your pictures doesn't really matter. What matters is that drawing the pictures gives you a tool to help you remember a story, to remember how things work, how they're connected, and how they go together. For example, today, I'm going to show you, with my limited artistic skills, how to draw a picture of a neuron, and what those parts of a neuron do in order to accomplish the job of a neuron. You see, no matter where a neuron is or what its specific shape is, every neuron has 4 main jobs. Just like a computer, it needs to receive information, it needs to figure out what that information means, it needs to do something about that information, and it needs to get its output to the place it needs to be. In this specific case, the 4 jobs of a neuron I want you to know are that they're built to receive and integrate inputs, they're built to generate a neuronal signal, what we call the action potential. They need to conduct that signal to a location and then transmit that information to a target. Now, a neuron, again, regardless of its location or its specific shape, has 5 main parts that helps it do this: the dendrites, the soma, the axon hillock or trigger zone, the axon, and the axon terminals or synaptic buttons. Now, remembering these parts, remembering what they do, memorizing what they look like, this can be really hard, but if you can draw a picture on your own, like I'm going to show you here, you can help yourself remember this. My advice is to try drawing this picture over and over and over. Do it at least once, if not several times a day, until you can do it easily from memory. Once you can do that, you're ready to ace the next exam. Okay, so how to draw a neuron. The first thing you do is you start by drawing the soma. This is the cell body. In fact, soma comes from the word for body, the Latin term for body. Right here, the cell body, you can tell it's a cell body because we've got a little nucleus there. It looks kind of like an eyeball, but it's actually a cell body. We want to start here because even though realistically the steps of how a neuron works starts with another part, the dendrites, the soma is what everything's attached to. Now, coming up out of your soma, you want to make a bunch of these branchy looking projections. These guys are the dendrites. Now remember, a neuron can have anywhere between 1 dendrite and thousands of dendrites, each of which can make millions of connections. In this case, we're just going to have a few dendrites. Now remember, the soma and the dendrites are involved in job number 1, which is receiving and integrating inputs. In fact, let's go ahead and just label these guys really quickly. We've got the soma and the dendrites. I'm sorry about my really awful handwriting, but this is as well as I can do on my iPad. So we've got the soma and the dendrites. Remember, they're involved in job number 1. Your dendrites can receive 2 different kinds of inputs. They can receive excitatory inputs from other neurons, and these excitatory inputs, they connect to dendrites and they tell this neuron to get really excited and do something. At the same time, however, this neuron can receive inhibitory inputs that make it less excited, less likely to do something. Think about the fact that it's based on the word excite to make it excited, or inhibit to make it inhibited. So again, excitatory inputs make it more likely that it's going to do something. Inhibitory inputs make it less likely it's going to do something. Now the cell has to integrate these inputs and figure out what to do with it. In fact, it receives hundreds, thousands of inputs that are either excitatory or inhibitory, and it combines these inputs trying to figure out whether or not it's going to send a signal. When it gets excited enough, though, it does decide to do something. It decides to send that action potential, and it does it by activating the action potential here at this little cone-shaped thing called the axon hillock or trigger zone. This is where job number 2 happens. Job number 2 happens when the axon hillock or trigger zone triggers that gigantic burst of electricity that we call the action potential. You can see I've got a big yellow action potential happening right here. And let's go ahead and label this axon hillock in yellow, I guess, to help us remember exactly what it is and what it does. It's the trigger zone where we trigger that burst of electricity, the neuronal signal, the action potential. Now, it doesn't do this guy very much good to make this burst of electricity, this signal, and then just be talking to himself. So the next job of this neuron is to get this signal where it needs to go. Now, depending on the neuron we're talking about, the signal can travel a fraction of an inch within the confines of your brain, or can travel upwards of a meter from the top of your head down to the base of the spine. And it does this using its axon. The axon is the one single long projection that gets information where it needs to go. Now remember, neurons can have anywhere between 1 and thousands of dendrites, but each neuron only has one axon. And if we want to make this axon really fast, we wrap it in that stuff called myelin, the myelin sheath, which is generated by glia, both in the central and peripheral nervous systems. Keep in mind the glia are not a one solid line, but have gaps in them. And these gaps are called nodes. These nodes are required for the functioning of the neuron. Without them, it wouldn't be able to send a signal at all. But remember that the axon, with its myelin, are responsible for job number 3, conducting a signal to where it needs to be. Now, the last job of the neuron is that it needs to be able to talk to other stuff. Neurons usually talk to other neurons, but they can also talk to your glands, and they can talk to your muscles. If you're moving, my talking, it's a result of my muscles knowing what to do because the neurons have told it what to do. And in order to do that, at the very end of its axon, it maintains these things called axon terminals or synaptic buttons. So here, let me go ahead. I'm going to label the axon so that we remember what that is. And then we also have these axon terminals. While I'm labeling this, ask yourself, what do axon terminals connect to, especially if we're talking to, I didn't plan this well, especially if we were talking to another neuron. I'll give you a second to figure it out. What if I drew a little branch up here like this? Will that help out a little bit? Yeah, okay, so I'm going to guess that you're guessing at this point that we're connecting to the dendrites of another neuron. You see, really, where job number 4 happens down here, we're starting job number 1 all over again. This neuron could be sending excitatory or inhibitory inputs to other neurons. Now again, your goal is not to be able to draw a really pretty picture, or a picture that illustrates anything that anyone would be able to see. The goal is for you to be able to draw this picture and tell yourself the story of how a neuron works. Because if you can draw that picture, you can tell that story, then you know what the parts are, and you're ready to ace the quiz on Chapter 2 and the exam a few weeks from now. Look for another mini lecture on the functioning of different brain areas. I'll go ahead and post that. And keep in mind that, of course, you can always contact me anytime you've got questions. I'm available via phone and in person during my office hours. You can send me an email. And don't forget, you can Skype me too at SF Psychology using Skype when I'm in office hours. So